This is the tangent episode. Oftentimes when we're looking at marketing from an architectural perspective, really we're just scratching the surface of the top. There's a perception that architects not only make things look pretty, but they make things expensive.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of The Business of Architecture. I'm your co-host today, Ryan Willard, and I'm joined here with the CEO of The Business of Architecture, Mr. Enoch Sears. Enoch, welcome.
Hello, Ryan. Good to see you.
Always a pleasure for us sitting down and doing a bit of a deep dive on a conversation. So this week we're going to be talking about something which we often talk quite a lot about with our clients here at Business of Architecture. And in the architecture industry, it's a mature industry, I would say. It's a pretty mature industry. There's a lot of architects out there. There's a lot of architects competing for the same kind of work in pretty much majority of sectors that you look at. And the question often arises is how do I differentiate myself? How do I be perceived differently from my peers and contemporaries? And I think probably from my perspective, I look at architecture practices a lot. We speak to literally hundreds, if not thousands, over the last decade or so. We've spoken to many firms. We've looked at too many architecture websites that I care to think about. And even with, I would say, my trained eye as an architect, I find it difficult to tell the difference between architecture practices. I find it difficult to tell the difference between the different type, particularly in terms of design work. Right now, we can kind of see the nuances in particular architects' signature pieces, okay, but those are more rare. Okay, that's certainly the rarity, and it's very difficult to tell apart one architect from another. It's very difficult to tell apart an architect from, say, an architectural technologist. And we've had clients here at BOA who are both architects and architectural technologists, and we've had some amazing architectural technologists come through who just produce a stellar, product, and they do amazing buildings. And I know in the UK certainly there's a lot of, there can be a bit of tension between the two professions, and it's a bit silly. And I appreciate there are a lot of kind of unregulated people who are using the word architecture in their title, as there are in the US, and they can often, it's difficult to even for the public to tell the difference between that caliber of talent versus like an architect or a really skilled architectural technologist. So we're going to discuss this, and Enoch and I will kind of give a few ideas of things that we've seen that have worked, common pitfalls.
And now a word from today's sponsor. A while ago, I began to hear reports of a company that was helping some of our clients build remote teams. We looked into it more closely and discovered the company World Teams that was helping small architectural practitioners build remote teams that were both capable and qualified. I was intrigued by another business that addressing one of the critical pain points for small architectural practices, which is the ability to grow and shrink a team effectively, to be able to handle higher workflow without having to staff up significantly, and also being very sensitive about labor costs. World Teams is built to address these issues. World Teams is a small but mighty company that helps architectural practices build high-performing remote teams quickly and efficiently, saving you the headache of sorting resumes and interviewing underqualified candidates. World Teams operates in your time zone and prioritizes near-native English speakers, ensuring clear and efficient communication with your remote team members. They have flexible contracts so you can adjust your team size as your needs evolve. Additionally, you're connected directly with your skilled professionals, which fosters trust and collaboration. And World Teams helps you reduce your operating costs without compromising the quality that is so important to a practice. To download a free guide for building a remote team for a small architectural practice, go to businessafarchitecture.com/world teams. That's one word, businessafarchitecture.com/world teams. As a reminder, sponsorship is not an endorsement, and you must do your own due diligence before entering into any business relationship. Go to businessafarchitecture.com/world teams
We are looking for architect developer stories for the Business of Architecture podcast. So, are you an architect developer with valuable insights to share? We're always on the lookout for passionate voices in the industry to join us on the Business of Architecture podcast. If you're ready to share your journey, lessons, strategies with our global audience, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us to explore being a guest on our show and help inspire other architect developers on their path. We'd be interested in hearing your story, whether you're at the very beginning of your development story or whether you have $100 million portfolio of projects already in the bag completed. We'd like to hear from you if you're working with the developers or that you've developed a number of small houses or you're working at a larger scale. I think it would make sense if let's just outline the problem that most practices face with differentiation. And I think the first one is you're in a mature, oversaturated market and there's 4 other super talented firms all going after the same.
Right, but before we do that, would it be a bad idea to just define what differentiation is so we can be very clear about what we mean by it?
Go for it.
It is a term that's used in marketing oftentimes. And I mean, we see it everywhere, but here's why it's important, is because differentiation is crucial for making a decision. And oftentimes people have difficulty making a decision if there's not enough differentiation. So for instance, like when you go, I'm just going to bring up a very common example. You're eating out at a restaurant, and let's say you're looking at the various sandwiches that are available, and you find there's a buffalo bison burger. There is a grilled chicken sandwich. There is a BLT, right? As you're reading the list, these things are very, very different. You understand mentally that if you order the barbecue bison burger, you're going to get something very different than the California burger that maybe has avocado on it and pickles and some different condiments. So the same thing happens when someone is out there looking to hire an architectural practice. Is what they're looking for, what they're thinking in their mind is, okay, how are these things different? Just like I'm looking on a menu and deciding, how is this going to taste for me right now? What's the difference between this sandwich and this sandwich? Clients, to make decisions, they're looking for differences between the firms because then they're going to rank and scale these things and these firms in their mind. Okay, so differentiation is simply the idea of really being able to look at something and being able to experience contrast with these two things, right? So another example would be, let's say that you're looking at fabric samples or paint colors. If you get 2 paint colors that are very, very similar, their just shades are almost indistinguishable, it's going to be very hard to differentiate those. On the other hand, if you have 2 different, like a very dark hued and a very light paint, there's going to be an obvious difference there. It's going to be easier to say, hey, this is what this one represents. This is what this one represents. And so this is kind of the idea of differentiation of what we're talking about, is being able to look at something and say, okay, this is clearly different than the other one. And what makes it so difficult in architectural particularly, or engineering, goes back to the reason why firms oftentimes feel commoditized. Because a commodity is almost the inverse of differentiation. So if you're looking at a commodity on one hand and differentiation on the other, these things would be polar opposites.
Mm-hmm.
So lack of differentiation means you're a commodity, right? Having differentiation means you're not a commodity. So in the quest for your firm to get better commissions, to charge higher fees, to attract people, differentiation is essential. And like Ryan said, before I so rudely interrupted him, he was going to outline some of the problems about, why is differentiation even a thing? Why are we talking about it? So Ryan, I didn't even Google it on Merriam-Webster. Do you think that definition was acceptable? Is there anything I left out?
I think that was a very good definition, and I did Google it whilst you were talking, and I was comparing your answer.
Give us the official
Well,
answer.
there's an AI overview here, which says differentiation marketing is a marketing strategy that aims to make a product or service stand out from its competitors. It involves creating different marketing campaigns to appeal to specific customer segments.
Okay. That's a good, interesting, different angle on it.
So
Sure.
I think what if we talk about it from the perspective of problems that architects face, is that a client has difficulty in making a choice because there's too much choices, there's too much sameness. It's very difficult to have your firm stand out from another firm. And the common strategies that architects employ to stand out from one another tend to be the same strategies that their competitors or their colleagues are employing as well. So now everybody does the same. And the classic architect differentiators are awards. You ain't different for having an award. In fact, having no awards is a difference.
That's an interesting one. We are the least awarded architects.
If we do not have any awards, things like perhaps lead specialization, that becomes very common. Lead or kind of sustainability consultant. I'm not saying that these are bad things and that we shouldn't pursue these things. They're just not as unique differentiators as we might like them to be. And they're quite sort of technical kind of ways of positioning. They're very rarely in the world of the client. Very, very rarely. And I think this is, well, we'll kind of talk about this a little bit later as what makes more effective differentiation strategies is when we've got a good ear for what the client is actually dealing with, listening to, worrying about, the problems that they're facing. So yeah, many practices we're all trying to differentiate ourselves in exactly the same ways as our competitors. And then the other thing that kind of compounds this is you're an architect, you've got your architecture website set up. You want to get some ideas for an architecture website. So what do? I'm
going to go look at all my competitors and see which ones I like.
Exactly. So that we end up modeling ourselves on other architects who are doing the same thing. So we become we're a very insular breed of people, I think, as an architecture profession. I know we don't like to hear that. And I've had I've done live talks before in the past where many years ago, maybe about 10 years ago, I did a live talk and it was all about collaboration. And I had different professionals. I had an architectural photographer, an architect, a graphic designer, and some other people come in and talk about collaborating and the art of collaborating. And there was a graphic designer who stood up in front of a room that was predominantly architects, I must admit. And he said, architects are not as good at collaborators as they like to think. And the room went.
And he said this guy had some serious courage to get up in front of the architects and say this.
He meant it. It was quite a rallying cry. It landed like that for a few people, but it pissed some other people off. And later
they stab him with their pencils and scales.
He ended up leaving after the event because he got into an argument with one of like a practice owner from a very big practice who was like, "You're talking out of your ass. We're the best collaborators. Don't appreciate that kind of conversation." And it was like,
wow,
interesting. So I've totally forgotten why. Why did I go off on that tangent? What was I talking about?
I don't know, but did he make it out alive? I mean, was he?
He did. We met him in the pub later on, and he told us the whole
It's all fun and games
that had happened, and
I
think he was chased out.
Well, I think you were. May I be so bold as to suggest that the idea of like we're great collaborators is not necessarily a great differentiator. Now, if in actuality that's true, it is a great differentiator. But let's face it, how many architects claim to be great collaborators?
Everybody.
Or great listeners, or, very sensitive to the client's needs, or we like to give the client the best outcome. See, that's the problem and challenge with why differentiation is hard. So one thing we definitely want to acknowledge in this episode is, Ryan and I are going to talk about some strategies for differentiation. We're going to talk about some problems that differentiation can help solve. And, on one hand, it's very easy to be the talking heads here on the podcast and spat out these ideas, but it is difficult to actually pull it off.
Yeah.
Right. But the gain and the possible benefits when you pull it off well can be unparalleled.
And the level of like execution of it now needs to be higher than ever before.
Exactly.
I think where I was going with that kind of tangential story that I just told about collaboration.
It wasn't just to entertain us, because I was entertained, right?
It was
this
in part
is a good story.
It was in part entertaining, I hope. But it was also making a point that as a profession, we don't look outside of ourselves as much as we like to think we do. And so when we were kind of being called out as not being as great at collaborators as we like to think, I thought it was quite interesting because, that was somebody from the outside saying it's really hard to work with architects. And we tend to look around what's okay and permissible for us to do. Now, I would preface this with the fact that we're a profession, right? There's something about being a profession where we're supposed to be doing things like how our peers are doing. Like that's the point of the profession. And I do think that there's a lot of pros to being in a profession. There's a lot of sort of brand equity in the idea of being an architect, and perhaps the idea of being an architect is, it's kind of in the public consciousness has deteriorated a little bit. But there's also a lot of obstacles when we think like we're inside of the profession, and we kind of get a bit afraid of stepping outside and looking at other businesses and how other businesses are marketing themselves, for example, or looking at a website that's really good at converting traffic and sales. Look at those sorts of websites. They often aren't beautiful in a design sense, but they work. And often what works in terms of converting sales traffic or marketing or appealing to your target market may not always might not have the same architectural design or graphic design thing that we're accustomed to. There's clearly a happy medium to them, but we've just got to be aware of that. And
so, are you making a case for ugly websites here, Ryan?
I am making a case for ugly websites.
Taking a stand for ugly websites?
I'm making a stand for ugly websites. I once heard, I think it was Eben Pagan or somebody who was talking about. So Eben Pagan's a kind of e-commerce guru and digital product guru. And he was talking about, in one of his seminars I was listening to, he was talking about his arguments that he would have with graphic designers about, I've made X amount of websites that have brought in over $100 million worth of cash and sales. And what converts the sale doesn't always look pretty in terms of the graphic design. And so he was kind of recounting, arguments that he might have with a graphic designer who was trying to get him to do something else. And he was like, yeah, but that's for you. That's for you, and you're kind of what you want it to look like. We've done this with websites. We've broken down websites and we've split test every last component of it, from the colors of what the buttons are to the text size to the thing. And he was coming at it from a very sort of marketeer's point, which was, kind of consumer driven decision making and what the consumer responds best to. And that's where his design had come from, and his sort of design expert, which was different from the design sensibilities of the graphic designer that they might have been working with.
And I think that points to the great depth that there is in this area of marketing, right? Oftentimes when we're looking at marketing from an architectural perspective, really we're just scratching the surface of the top of the deep, vast fissures and abysses of knowledge that go down when it comes to marketing itself. Now, the other thing regarding websites, Ryan, is like, what's interesting is I'm going to make an assertion and maybe tell me if you think it's off. And we can have a vicious debate here. Okay.
Let's do it.
So the assertion is that an e-commerce website, like even Pagan's doing, or an information product website, the purpose of that website is to get sales, to get customers, to make money. I'm going to assert that typically the purpose of a graphic designer's website or an architect's website is to not look bad.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about my assertion?
I would agree with you. And most architects' websites are designed for, and again, this is not a bad thing, but they're designed for confidence in the practice. And they're often they're sitting in part of a sales process where there's already a relationship with that client, or the client's been referred to them, and they're checking a website to make sure that this person is real. So it's rare that we ever see an architectural website designed to drive traffic to it, or to convert sales, or to have that kind of language in it. So again, but that's part of the marketing strategy, right? That a practice owner should be looking at when they're designing their website. Well, what's the point of this website? Is it to be, do we have like a really solid prospecting discipline where the website is literally just going to be a kind of add-on, an enhancement to that, and people look at it and it's got beautiful pictures on it and great, they just tick the box? Is the website serving a function more for the team? And this is also a legitimate thing. I know when I was at RSHP, they were very interested in the internal marketing that happens. So a larger practice, they might have a website which is for their own, for their own team. Is the website being designed? I mean, there is certainly value as well for a website to be appealing to an architect because of hiring and team building. Okay, so if you're looking at if you're a student or a young talented architect who's got a keen design eye, and then you land on a website which just looks like trashy sales, you're probably going to be repulsed by that and not want to have anything to do with it. So there's a kind of balance where all these things need to sort of coexist with each other, and each practice needs to kind of get in mind what their priorities are. And these days, you can have a trashy looking sales funnel which is completely independent to your website, and your website is now doing something totally different. Your website is more like a sort of portfolio, and then you've got an independent sales funnel which doesn't tie back to a website, and you can have the sales language and a pain funnel, if you like, when people are going down that, and it's designed in a particular way which is very specific to that target market, which again just kind of, it's just starting to point to the wealth of stuff and strategy that exists when we're looking at kind of marketing ourselves.
Yeah. I think another problem, Ryan, would be that I'm not getting as many inbound inquiries as I would like to get. Mm-hmm. And the ones I do get are referrals from people who already know me. In other words, I'm not getting new exposure out there in the marketplace from people that are finding us, that are finding our work, and that are approaching us about working with us. Mm-hmm. That could be another pain point or problem that our listeners that you may be experiencing or dealing with, and wanting to know how to crack that nut.
Yep, absolutely. The competition on fees. So the race to the bottom on fees, and this one obviously always breaks our heart, and particularly when you see kind of three talented architects all lowering their fees or being squeezed by the client, and the client is kind of dangling a opportunity in front of all of them, and that's, again, they kind of feel like they're being commoditized. Another thing I think that a lot of architects struggle with is that people simply don't know what an architect does, or they have a very fixed idea of what an architect does. They only know that the architect does drawings and they make things look pretty. and that's it. And when we're inside of that,
Or they make them expensive.
yeah, they make it expensive, and they make it expensive but pretty, and they might help us get planning permission sometimes.
And
Not even,
let
they
me
don't even
jump
take
in there
that,
with
to
a
be
quick
fair.
story. I was Ryan, this is certainly a tangent, but look, let's face it, we got lots of time here, so we have plenty of time for tangents,
Let's
right?
just go on tangents all
Let's
day.
just go. Let's have a tangent episode. This is the tangent episode. I was talking with a construction manager who was working with a lot of very high-end projects. He was working on these multifamily high-end projects in Los Angeles that there's not a lot of, but he was working with one that was done by a rather prominent architecture practice. And there had been a mistake or an oversight in terms of this tower, this residential tower had these balconies extending out from a lot of the rooms. And the design intent for the architects was to have a recessed light in the balcony above you so that you have this nice look. Not only does it light up the building, but also it's the nice indiscreet light, and it's kind of happening, down below. Like you go out on your balcony and you have some nice overhead light. All right. Architects designed it well, right? So somehow it got lost in translation, and as they're going through the value engineering, they discovered that for whatever reason, these recessed lights were going to be very expensive, quote unquote, expensive, right? Now, as an architect, I don't know exactly why they were so abnormally expensive. Obviously, a recessed is going to be more expensive than a surface-mounted fixture. It can get into fireproofing issues sometimes if you're trying to, depending on where the fire membrane is that separates the floors. That could be an issue if you're trying to put a recessed light up there. So I didn't have enough information to know why this was the case. But this construction manager, for him, it was all about the architects just doing things the expensive way. He was like, these architects, they just always, if there's an expensive way to do it, they're thinking about how to do it that way. And he was like, we could save so much money. Why didn't they just put some surface surface mounted fixtures on the underside of these balconies? And I mean, in my head, I'm thinking, oh, that who knows where that would go, right? So a couple things came up out of that conversation. Number one is there's a perception that architects not only make things look pretty, but they make things expensive, right?
Yeah.
This is a perception, like, oh damn, the architects are gonna make this more expensive. And then there's also there's also maybe an underestimation or an underappreciation, I guess might be the right word, for the little small details that architects do put into projects that almost go unnoticed, but that as taken as a whole makes it a beautiful project that really flows seamlessly and has good appeal to it and everything. And that would be an example like these recessed mount lights. Like for the average layperson or a construction manager or someone walking by, they might think, oh, what's the big difference between having a surface mounted fixture or a recessed fixture? But as architects, we know that oftentimes it's those things that make a massive difference. And then we get understandably annoyed when now we're trying to argue with the contractor and explain why saving all this money. Now we're faced with trying to tell the owner why we should stick with the original fixtures, even though it's going to cost $500,000 more, whatever the cost is, to do it the way we originally designed it. And now the owners are looking at the architects saying, damn, why do they, these architects are just expensive. So there's a gap. And how does this relate to differentiation? Well, when you have more differentiation in your practice, when you have a more solid standing in terms of being differentiated and being picked for a particular reason, these conversations are going to flow more smoothly. You're going to have more authority. You're going to have more gravitas.
Can I?
Go ahead.
I might pull it off on another tangent. I wanted to share some more upsetting stories in the same vein as the one that you just shared there.
I love upsetting stories. Let's face it, it's the spice of life.
Yeah, upsetting. And I think from the listeners on this episode, we'd like to hear your upsetting stories where people have misunderstood what you do or undervalued you. We'd love to hear those stories, and perhaps we'll read some of them out and it will prompt another conversation. But I've got two examples here. Once was I used to attend, and still do sometimes, these property investing seminars. And I was at one of these from a very well-known property investing group in the UK. And they had one of their investors talking about hiring architects. And I was like, this is going to be good. And the investor basically got up there and said, now, with architects, they're all pretty much the same. They're very agreeable. And it's well worth you shopping around, because some of them just try and rip you off of the price, but they're very easy to kind of squeeze, and you can always find someone who's going to do it cheap. And that was,
ouch. Ouch. That stings.
And it was pretty painful. And it was like, oh man, this guy hasn't spoken at all to any of the value that a good architect brings, or how they can maximize the value in the property. And it was literally just, they're a nuisance. They're a kind of a necessary evil.
Scum of the earth.
They might help you with a bit of planning. The other upsetting story was when I was working at Grimshaw, and I was maybe I was newly qualified, or I was just doing my exams. I don't remember which, but I was working on the Eden project in Cornwall, and there was a kind of, Grimshaw had done the Eden project maybe 20 years prior, or 10 years prior, or something like that. And it's a big series of these big geodesic domes covered in EFTE or whatever it was. Anyway, the new project that we had was to design this kind of hanging platform from the center of one of these domes. Really cool, exciting, interesting project. And I don't really remember how the project got back to Grimshaw, but someone at Grimshaw had kind of made sure that we were involved, and that the kind of client didn't just put any old kind of staircase up and just, made it look horrible. So we'd done a lot of work on this beautiful suspended platform, and myself and the project architect, so there's just two of us, we traveled all the way down to Cornwall, beautiful train ride. We got there and we met with the client and a contractor and some other, maybe there was the engineer that was there, about the project. And we kind of presented our ideas, and everyone was like, great, looks lovely. And there was a point in the conversation where it might have been the contractor, but he was joking, but it was also like a dagger in the heart. He said, right, now the big boys are going to have a conversation about the real stuff, about what happens in a project. So you guys are free to leave. And we packed up our bag.
Okay. Oh, it's so condescending.
And we left. And I mean, the project architect was furious. I seem to remember he was like, that was so rude. But it was like they were talking money, they were talking contract, they were talking whatever other legal considerations. They might have been talking a bigger picture business plan for what the project was about. I don't know, but there was clearly a sort of condescending nature where, the architect was put into a little pigeonhole. We were there as the people that were just making sure it looked pretty. And obviously it was a lot more than that, and there was a very thoughtful strategy of how it was working. Oh, it makes me mad now, Enoch.
That guy just sounds like a narcissist, Ryan.
It makes me mad
probably
now.
He probably
makes me mad
probably
now.
is pathological.
Honestly. So
it reminds me of a marriage where your marriage partner knows how to push your buttons. It's like hell hath no fury like an architect scorns, I mean, if you could say something to piss off an architect even more, it'd be calling him a little boy. Or like saying, hey, the big boys are going to have the conversation now. I mean, whether you're a man or a woman, that's going to piss you off. If you're a woman, that'll really piss you off.
Yeah.
She's probably used to hearing that a lot.
Not very nice. Not very nice. But again, obviously there's a kind of dick factor in that. I don't mean like in, just him being a dick.
Well, both ways.
Both ways, right?
He has a dick and he is a dick.
And he is being a dick. But there is, there's that aspect of whatever the misunderstandings that people have about architects, and it kind of just reinforces this idea of it's really important to be clear about what it is that the architect, what's the value proposition that the architect is is providing? How do we stand out in this kind of sea of other firms? There are preconceptions about what the architect does.
Yeah, these are all conversations that exist that we can be aware of, and that as we're aware of them, we can be a conscious participant in how we present ourselves and how we interact with clients in meetings and how we lead our teams in this greater context.
Mm-hmm.
So Ryan, I was thinking that right now would be a great point to just pause, because we have set up, we talked a little about differentiation, what it is, given some examples of why it's important, talking about the problems that cause this to actually happen. What do you say we break this episode right here? Let's cut it. Let's hop back. In part 2 of this, we'll be looking at what are some strategies for differentiation. I think we've made the case that differentiation is needed. Could be a valuable tool in the tool belt.
Sounds good.
Ryan, anything else you want to say to be complete for this episode?
No, I think that's all for now.
Beautiful.
And that's a wrap. Hey, Enoch Sears here, and I have a request. Since you are a listener here of the Business of Architecture podcast, Ryan and I, we love putting this podcast together. We love sharing information as much as we can glean from all the other industries that we're a part of to bring it back to empower you as an architect and a designer. And one thing that helps us in our mission is the growth of this podcast, simply because it helps other architects stand for more of their value, spreads the business information that we're sharing to empower architects together, so architects, designers, engineers can really step into their greatness, whatever that looks like for each individual. And so here my simple ask is for you to join us and be part of our community by doing the following: heading over to iTunes and leaving a review of the podcast. And as an expression of our sincere thanks, we would like to give you a free CEU course that can get you one professional development unit, but more importantly, we'll give you a very solid and firm foundation on your journey to becoming a profitable and thriving architect. So here's the process for that. After you leave us a review, send an email to support@businessofarchitecture.com. Let us know the username that you use to leave the review, and we will send you that free training. On the training, you'll discover what 99% of architecture firm owners wish they would have known 20 years ago. And now a word from today's sponsor. A while ago, I began to hear reports of a company that was helping some of our clients build remote teams. We looked into it more closely and discovered the company World Teams that was helping small architectural practitioners build remote teams that were both capable and qualified. I was intrigued by another business that addressing one of the critical pain points for small architectural practices, which is the ability to grow and shrink a team effectively, to be able to handle higher workflow without having to staff up significantly, and also being very sensitive about labor costs. World Teams is built to address these issues. World Teams is a small but mighty company that helps architectural practices build high-performing remote teams quickly and efficiently, saving you the headache of sorting resumes and interviewing underqualified candidates. World Teams operates in your time zone and prioritizes near-native English speakers, ensuring clear and efficient communication with your remote team members. They have flexible contracts so you can adjust your team size as your needs evolve. Additionally, you're connected directly with your skilled professionals, which fosters trust and collaboration. And World Teams helps you reduce your operating costs without compromising the quality that is so important to a practice. To download a free guide for building a remote team for a small architectural practice, go to businessofarchitecture.com/world teams. That's one word, businessofarchitecture.com/world teams. As a reminder, sponsorship is not an endorsement, and you must do your own due diligence before entering into any business relationship. Go to businessofarchitecture.com/world teams.
The views expressed on this show by my guests do not represent those of the host, and I make no representation, promise, guarantee, pledge, warranty, contract bond, or commitment, except to help you be unstoppable.